Welcome to the Therapist Thrival Guide. My name is Miranda Barker. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Lucas Vellini, LMFT.
Good to be here.
And today we are talking about the holidays, family dynamics, and really like how to get through the holidays with your families. But actually, it's also like helping your clients get through the holidays, right? We can talk about it from both directions. So
we're all humans that experience the holidays with family.
Exactly. We all have family stuff. We all struggle with this sort of thing and setting boundaries and figuring out, how to get through some of this stuff. And so this episode is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk about this. And we have Letisha Harris with us.
Hello.
Letisha, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Letisha Harris. I am a mental health practitioner.
You say that with a question
Ellie?
mark?
Well, sometimes I try to figure out where to place my title, but...
No, I remember this. So you are pre-licensed still, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And so I think that's why you have the question mark.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
You went to school. You're on track for LPCC, is that right?
Correct, yes.
Okay. I was like testing my memory there.
Yep.
You might recognize Letisha's voice, or if you're watching this on YouTube, then you'll recognize her face because you were just on an episode with us where we talked about The Whole Brain Child.
Yes.
Great book.
So good.
Yes, it was amazing.
If you have not yet listened to that episode, cue that one up next because it's a really good one. But,
yes.
And if you haven't read the book, you're an irresponsible therapist.
Well, and also...
I'm going to go that far.
Would you say that even for like people who see adults?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, understanding the complexity of child development, human development, from the perspective of Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson, or just interpersonal neurobiology in general.
Yep.
Absolutely.
It's like every client you work with is either currently in childhood or at one point was in childhood.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I think that for a lot of people, and we talked about this on the episode, but for a lot of people, that book helps us. It puts brain terminology into like terms that you can understand for your clients, not just for your kids.
yeah, super digestible neuroscience.
Exactly.
Is what it is.
Exactly. So cue that one up for after this episode, and
because it'll also help you get through the holidays.
I totally agree. It's so true.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. I feel like you kind of, as a therapist, you go through almost, especially as a kid therapist, but probably just as much so as an adult therapist, you kind of go through this like this seasonality with your clients where it's like, all right, in August, all of my clients are talking about back to school. And in September, we're all talking about routine. We're all talking about like how how is this going? And then in like November, December, everyone starts to kind of go, all right, I'm starting to like look towards the holidays, starting to make these plans with family. And you kind of have the same conversation with so many of your clients. Is that how it is for you guys too?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you can notice the additional weight that they start bringing into the office with them.
Yeah. Well, and I think that just like society starts to kind of their mindset kind of turns towards these things, and you see similar mindset shifts or kind of similar themes even in like the new year where like you have people talking about change, and I don't know, it seems like as a society we have these like conversations that just kind of we keep going back to. And maybe that's also like a Minnesota thing too, where like, in February or March, everyone's talking about how we're ready for winter to end, but I don't know.
Oh gosh. And holiday stress too. I do think it's regional in the sense of like here in Minnesota, it's the holiday stress compounded by winter is coming.
That's true. But I think that for most people, like winter is still fun at this point.
Ugh.
Like
I don't believe them. I don't buy it.
I am not someone who likes snow, but I like a white Christmas. I like that. And so it's, you'll hear me complain in a couple months about how I'm ready for the snow to end.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about the weather. We're talking about family. And this is a topic that you really like talking about, Lucas. Like you specialize in working with mainly like adult children, navigating family relationships or like navigating parent relationships. And so Where do you want to start with this conversation?
Well, I think that's like this topic is a good example of why I became so passionate about working with like adult siblings and their aging parents as a family therapist, because like one of the things in grad school that I noticed was it's like all the family therapy models, all the family therapy teachings, it kind of stops once the kids are launched,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that sends a false message that once you get your kids grown, it's like life's easy peasy. It's like it's smooth sailing.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's a total opposite of that. It's like some of the most painful family conflicts that I've ever observed have happened much later in life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Why? So like, what are some issues that you're seeing adult children kind of deal with the holidays or with their families?
I think it's less like, I don't think it's a direct effect of the holidays in and of itself as much as it's like all the coping skills that we utilize throughout the year to keep all of our unresolved grief from our childhood and family of origin suppressed. It's like they don't work anymore when it comes to the holidays because we know that we have to face these people. It's like we're all going to get together in this same space, and all of us are bringing all of that suppressed emotion that we've been, using our manager parts, if you will, to, kind of keep at bay throughout the year. And it's like once you put that system back into the same space, immediately all the tensions that still exist within that system fills the space. And then they have to figure out how to kind of get through it, really. Because I think that's how people go into the holidays. It's like, how am I going to get through this Thanksgiving dinner with these 4 people that I cannot stand, that I have so much resentment and unresolved anger toward?
Well, I think part of it too is that, and just as you're talking, I was thinking through, like, for many of us, we see our families throughout the year, but we see them in small doses mainly. Like, my daughter just had her birthday party. And so it's like, my in-laws came up,
2
my family
hours.
came up. Exactly.
I mean, you can get by 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Probably 60 at a birthday party.
And so it's like you see them in small doses. And I think that, like, even if you have tumultuous relationships with your families, you can usually kind of like stuff things down, keep things pretty shallow and move through like the small doses. But I think that's why so many people have holiday anxiety around family stuff, is because I think there's, number one, an expectation. And maybe we should talk a lot about expectations.
I left that one out. So everything I just said, and then on top of it, the massive pressure to be joyful.
Yeah.
Well, and like the expectation to see your family, but then also expectations to like spend long periods of time with them during this. And I don't know about for you two, but like I live out of state from my in-laws and my family. So it's like my in-laws and my parents and like my siblings, they all kind of live in the same state, about an hour from each other. And so like there is this expectation of during the holidays, we see everybody and we like take a week off of work and we're like doing the holiday, like the holiday tour. And I mean, like gratefully and thankfully, like both of my parents, my in-laws, like their marriages are intact. So it's like you have those 2 stops. But for some people, it's like you see 4 or 5, many more people.
Oh yeah.
And so that's I think another part why it can be hard is you're like, okay, I'm seeing them for long periods of time. We can't just talk about the snow and stare at my daughter for, hours.
We can only pretend that everything's okay for so long.
Well, and so then like some of that deeper stuff, some of like the politics, like some of the harder things, they start to come out because you can't necessarily like just push those down for so long. I don't know. Someone's bound to make a comment, but
and that's when I start to enjoy the holidays.
That's what I fade into the background and just let everybody
just be grateful that this year is not an election year.
Right.
It'll make the holidays a little bit easier. But so I mean, I think that let's start there. Let's talk about some expectations. Let's talk about like why some of these are hard. And then also like going into how do you guys work with clients around expectation setting?
Yeah. What does this look like in your kind of method or approach to this work being community-based?
So expectations, oftentimes we look at just what they need to do, what they want to do, and how those can kind of connect with each other and how we can work towards making sure that their goal is met. So in community-based especially, it's a lot more of them in their own element and in their own environment. And so having to express to them, because oftentimes I have a couple of clients who have kids, and so sometimes it's chaos, right? And so how do you meet expectations, or how do you set expectations when you're in a world of chaos constantly, right? How do you navigate through holidays when you have your kids, you have your nieces and nephews, you have family members who don't get along, you have dynamics that are not understood or relatable. And you also have some of those other barriers like financial barriers or relationship barriers. Yeah.
As you're talking, it's making me realize too that like even when we're talking about expectations, there are subcategories within that to be talking with your clients about like what are your self-expectations? What are your expectations of the holidays? Like, and then what are your family's expectations?
Yeah, so like the external expectations put on you that you feel pressure from.
Right.
And then the internal expectations of how you want to respond to that.
Right.
Which is what we can work with our clients on, is how they can generate some internal expectations that are going to equip them to manage the external expectations. And I think a big one is telling them, like making it clear, it's like, expect chaos.
Yep.
So one of my like least favorite Christmas movies, because I think it's a stressful movie for me. Like,
don't say Elf.
No.
Because everyone will hate you.
No, it's Christmas with the Cranks. Have you ever seen that?
Is that a Tim Allen one?
It is a Tim Allen movie. It's, sorry guys, it's garbage.
Does it take place in Detroit?
I don't know.
Probably.
But
it's very stressful.
I think that movie, it's a stressful movie because you see how they, like Tim Allen and his wife, Jamie Lee Curtis, I think that's who it is.
Yeah.
They like make the decision to just throw everybody's expectations on them out the window because their daughter's not coming home for the holidays. So then they're like, well, screw this then. Like, we're going to do whatever we want. We're going to we're going to go on a cruise during Christmas, and everybody around them kind of breaks. And they're like, what? You're not going to do the holidays? And I think that
I'm going to watch this movie. I think I might like this movie.
It's quite interesting, but it speaks to societal expectations. It speaks to like your neighborhood, your family, your friends.
Like they don't put Christmas lights up.
Yeah, everybody's expectations.
Yeah, and so their neighbors like freak out.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good example of how like when you take a step back and when you say, well, what do I actually want to do for the holidays? When I'm just making decisions myself, and then everybody kind of crumbles around you, and how like there are so many expectations around you. But
and then the guilt of that, right? Like how do you deal with that? Because there's expectations from your family, there's expectations in society just around what Christmas or what Thanksgiving or what the holiday is supposed to look like.
Yeah.
I mean, even Halloween, like what those holidays, all of those running in together, what they're supposed to look like, what they're supposed to feel like, what you're expected to do, how much time you're expected to spend with family.
How much money you're expected to spend.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Pinterest did not help.
Instagram. Oh, yeah.
There was I think it was like a BuzzFeed thing. Like there's no empirical validity to this assessment, but it matched your zodiac sign with like how you respond to the holidays and it just showed pictures of like how your house is decorated for Christmas.
Oh, that's funny.
And so like I dig into this and I didn't have any expectation, but I was eager to get to my zodiac sign, which was Capricorn. And the one right before Capricorn was like the most decked out Christmas lights house I'd ever seen. Like it was, and like I remember seeing it, and my first thought was like, oh my gosh, that's obnoxious. Like I hate that person.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next one was Capricorn, and the Capricorn house, the guy just put lights on the front of the garage that said, "This guy sucks," with an arrow pointing to the previous one.
Oh, that's so funny.
And I was like, oh my gosh, that is me.
Oh, that's so funny.
And so like, I think a big, not just for the holidays, but in general, it's like people need to figure out how to be okay with making a choice that they know will disappoint somebody else's expectation of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's just wellness.
Yeah.
But it's hard. And it's increasingly hard in the holidays because the expectations people put on you are heightened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So maybe when you're a therapist kind of walking through this with a client, it is kind of just asking the questions around like, what were holidays like growing up for you? What are they like now? What sort of expectations do you feel like your family puts on you for the holidays? Mm-hmm. Which ones do you think are reasonable? Which ones are the ones that maybe you feel like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I mean,
and it gets deep too, because when you mention that, it's like the role of like rituals, and tradition.
See, that's it. See, and that's what's hard. And this is what's kind of trippy about recording this episode is because I'm 38 weeks pregnant. And by the time this episode airs, I'm going to be on maternity leave and figuring out some of this stuff, right? Yeah. Like figuring out, do I bring a brand new baby to the holidays?
Right.
You sure will be expected to.
I sure will be expected to. But it is kind of that thing where it's like you have this larger expectations, and then there's also kind of like all right, how do I start the conversations now with my family around like, can we loosen the expectations around this? Can we, are there ways that I can, see family, do these different things while also kind of keeping my own sanity in mind, and and so maybe when you're having conversations with clients and the expectations do not match what's realistic for them, it's having conversations around what's the compromise? How do we start setting expectations early with our families? How do we start these conversations early? And I mean, some of it goes back to basic communication skills, right, too?
Yeah, give people a heads up. One of the things I always encourage my clients to do, because I don't know if it's just me, but like all my clients seem to talk about me a lot with the people in their lives. Like the people in their lives like know me. Like they ask about me, and it's like they give them updates on.
It is funny when a client when a client's significant other or other people in their life knows your name or
and like you exist in their consciousness. Like you have you kind of have a sense of who they are. But what I always tell my clients is, like if they need to set a boundary, or if they really want to not do something, especially like holiday related, I tell them to just like blame it on me. Just be like, well, Lucas was very insistent, that it would be within my best interest to just not attend this for this reason. I have to give it a shot. It's like I have to at least give this a try. He seems pretty certain that this is what I should do. And so it's like, I think that's always a resource, especially when people first experiment with it. And then generally what they find is like people respond to it in a much less horrifying way than they imagine they will in their mind.
Okay, so you said the B word.
No, I didn't. Oh, boundaries? Yeah, okay.
You said boundaries, and I was waiting for that word to come up in this conversation because gosh, do I hate that word. Me too. It's so over therapized, so overused.
That lands right under how does that make you feel?
Yeah. Yeah. But how do you actually set boundaries? How do you help clients actually set boundaries? And what the hell are boundaries when it comes to this topic?
That's what I hate about boundaries, because I hate it because it's so overused, but it's also so important.
Right.
So family therapists, how do you start thinking about boundaries, and how do you help your clients talk about boundaries and figure out boundaries?
When you assuming that the client is in a phase of life where it's like they have their own family system now, they have kids, you know, and it's I think boundaries. I mean, you look at it at all different levels. So like there's their newly formed family system, their family of creation. You know, there's a boundary that exists around them, you know, and all the associated subsystems. So like parent A's, you know, extended family, parent B's extended family, nieces, nephews, cousins, aunts, uncles, now across 3 to 4 generations. And then there are also boundaries that exist within each of those subsystems between each individual.
And when you're using the word here, you're talking about like boundaries around like this is this family. This is almost like these invisible.
Yeah, they're invisible lines of demarcation that separate and organize individuals and subsystems within larger systems. And like family systems therapists, we look at boundaries through the lens of it's either a rigid boundary, which means like they're very closed systems that outside systems don't have much of any influence at all. It could be a diffuse boundary, which means there's hardly a boundary at all. You know,
Passing back and forth.
It's like everything is entering and exiting the system, which leads to chaos. And then the goal is a clear boundary, which allows each subsystem to be differentiated as its own distinct entity, but it coexists in relationship to all of these other systems. But ultimately, you know, it's like the parents need to take responsibility for their family of creation and have conversations around, like, what do we want our rituals to be? What traditions do we want to hold on to and, you know, kind of perpetuate into the next generation? And that gets tricky too, because their parents, you know, it's like sometimes you have to choose which family's tradition you're going to adopt. And then when you're up, you know, the extended generation on the losing end of that, it's like that takes away from your symbolic immortality, because something you invested your whole life in that was meaningful to you is not going to exist anymore after you die. You know, it's not going to be carried on. And so it's like that's what they need. That's the parents' responsibility first and foremost, is to talk with their partner about what they want the holidays to mean to them, what they want it to look like, what they don't want it to look like. And, you know, first and foremost, like, make sure that it's special for your kids.
Yeah.
It's funny, like I'm the oldest in my family, and so I was the first one to get married, and my husband was also the first one to get married. And so I felt like in some ways we were the guinea pigs for both of our families, where we were like, all right, what's Colin and Miranda going to do? Like and so the first few years were super hard, like just kind of testing some of those boundaries, figuring out like whose expectations were where, and then also just feeling like we didn't have control over any of this. We were still kind of like held by our family of origin and some of these things. And then over time, it started to get easier. We started to figure out, okay, I think we did a better job of having conversations like that around, you know, what do we want our family to do? What do we want our traditions to look like? What's meaningful to you about some of these holiday traditions? What's meaningful to me? What do we want to pass on to our kids? What do we want to continue? And then you inevitably, like, you know, a sibling gets married, and then they will say, this truly happened in one of our families, where it's like one of our siblings then goes, we're not going to do that. We're not going to come for Christmas. And then it's like, wait, what? Like, you're allowed to do that?
Right.
As if like all the dominoes are just going to fall now.
Yeah.
So you just destroyed our entire family.
Yeah. And it's just funny because then you realize, like, no, you adjust. Like, you figure it out.
You're fine.
You're fine.
And that's what, when I was saying earlier, like, people's responses to you setting a boundary or, like, you know, not forcing yourself to adhere to their expectations of you, they tend to respond to it better than you anticipate. And a big reason for that is because what you're also doing in that moment is giving them permission to do the same thing for themselves.
Yep.
Yes.
You know, and like, it was exactly how you said it. Like, you can do that? That's an option?
Right.
We're free, autonomous beings?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I can break free.
Well, and so you're right. Like, and so then you start to kind of, you are given permission to have more of those conversations and realize what you truly want this to look like. And then it starts feeling better. It starts feeling more comfortable. It starts feeling like less of a, well, I have to do this or I'm expected to do
it's
this.
like that rigidity that like closes everybody in, which is all the stress of the holidays. It just starts to open up.
Yeah. Yep. And so I think that I saw that happen in my own life just as like more of the flexibility was introduced and more of like those conversations were had. And I think that because of both, like all of those experiences, I'm able to, have more candid conversations with clients then about like, I give you permission to disrupt this a little bit.
Yeah.
And again, it's like having some of those conversations early and
that's ultimately the goal of every family system, is to figure out how to land in the center point of chaos and rigidity. Because it's like when it's too, like what you were talking about was like you're feeling the pressures of the rigidity of your family and your expectations. You and Colin, getting married, disrupted that because now there's an additional extended family coming into play. And so you deviate from the norm, which disrupts rigidity. And that blows people's minds, opens their minds, but then what could be problematic is if then everybody responded like, all right, no more rules, no more expectations. Everybody just do what they want.
Right.
It's like, that's chaos, it's like, you don't want to go into that realm. But it's like people need to be open to the realities that things will look different as families evolve and new generations come into play.
Right.
And it's difficult, it's like my role as a parent as my kids age is to not get in the way of them becoming what they need to become and not putting pressure on them to not evolve in the ways that they find themselves wanting to evolve. And what's difficult about that is, depending on how I look at it, I guess, because a lot of people will look at it as that's a loss for me. By letting them do that, it's like I'm losing out on something. But I don't look at it that way. I look at it as my kids are evolving.
Yeah.
It's like this is what my job is as a parent, and to see them become their own version of themselves is beautiful.
Yeah.
I think you bring up an interesting point, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, Letisha. But like there is kind of a continual push and pull that happens throughout the year, but I think that it gets kind of concentrated during the holidays, where you're tasked with figuring out the balance between traditions, routine, and growth. Like you're because there's so much that's comfortable, there's so much richness, there's so much that is powerful in some of these traditions that we can carry on, that we can follow through with. But then there's also this need for growth, and there's this need for some flexibility. And so I think that like that's another aspect that's difficult, but also really important around holidays and communicating with families. I don't know if you have a perspective or any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was going to say, you spoke to comfort, right? I think as your family is growing and as your kids start to get into their teenage years and early adulthood, like there's a comfortable expectation that they're going to come, right? So like they're no longer in your home, or they have friends that are independent of you. And so they're expected to come home for the holiday, right? They're expected to do things. And so there's that comfortableness in in that expectation, right? And so then as that starts to shift and they start to create their own families and they start to have their own independence, that status quo and that comfortableness starts to shift. And so you start to say, now what do we do, right? And so it's like this year they're not coming, everything's going to go haywire, right? Because you're in an uncomfortable state, right? Like, where do we go from here? Are they going to come this year? Are they going to come next year? Are they going to come the year after that, right?
Who am I anymore?
Right, exactly. And so your status quo starts to change, right? Are they expected now to never come, right? And then that chaos in your brain starts to go, I got to get them to come, right? I got to
the loss
have
of
this
predictability.
Thing, right? Exactly.
Which is anxiety provoking.
This thing has to happen. I have to make all these changes so that they will come, right? Or I have to go to them then, right? What do we
can't
do?
Not be together.
Right, exactly. And being present, right? Like making sure that you're present in that space, right? This year is this year, right? this year doesn't dictate what happens next year.
That's
right?
a good point.
So if they're not coming this year, what do we do for this year? Like to be present in this year, right? So that if they come next year, we can be present in next year and not be like, oh, they're not going to come. And then they be like, hey, we're coming this year. And you're like, we were going blah, 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 because we expected you not to. So being present in the year that you're in and in the time and in the space that you're in. If they don't come, they don't come. If they come, they come.
And also keeping in mind that there are more holidays to come.
Right,
you know?
exactly.
And
it's
so
not the only
a
holiday.
good follow-up question would be, okay, so you're not coming this year. Like, is this going to be like a pattern?
Right.
You know, it's like, are you going to start flip-flopping? You know, is this like a unique situation? Or are you telling me that you will never spend another holiday with your parents again? And people, like what you just said, like that's a super common dynamic that people get caught up in. And that's what derives the pressure that so many people feel externally.
Exactly.
But individuals who have that response that was just laid out, it's like that is a demonstration of how much they lack differentiation and how much their sense of self is based upon the people that they're in relationship to.
Right.
You know, it's like they operate from an excess of togetherness and relationality. And the more you operate in an excess of togetherness, the lesser of an individual you are.
Right.
And the lesser of an individual you are, it's like that's where your relationships start to fall apart because everyone you're in relationship over time, one, they feel nothing but pressure from you because you're communicating to them implicitly, sometimes explicitly, I need you in my life to know who I am.
Right.
But the other dynamic is people struggle in relationship to folks that operate from excessive relationality because it's like, who are you even? Where is your individuality? What's interesting about you? You know, it's like, because when people don't have a clear, distinct sense of self and they constantly just operate in reaction to other people, it's like they don't really bring much to the table in relationships other than pressure.
And stress.
Right.
And stress,
And draining. I mean, it's very draining.
Exhausting.
It's sucking the life out of the other person because you're trying to get as much time and as much of that person as you possibly can so that you can fuel yourself to the next year or you can fuel yourself to the next holiday, right? You know, I think about relationships and I think about like women and men in their relationship and how if a man says something to a woman, oftentimes she can carry that thing to the next great thing that he says, right? And so when you think about holidays and you think about spending time with your family, as he was saying, with people who need to be in relationship, if they're spending time, I'm spending all day with you, right? Like, let's go shopping. Let's go do this. Let's go do these things, right? And exhausting you and sucking the life out of you so that my life can be full until I see you again. Or until we spend the next holiday together, or until we spend the next big function together, right? I'm sucking all I can out of you because I'm not going to spend time with you until that next event.
And when I talk with clients about this and we start kind of making some of these plans or having some of these conversations around expectations and kind of planning for the holidays, I will often, ask like, what would happen if you didn't go, or what would happen if you changed your mind, or what would happen if this, and you just kind of challenge them to think a little bit about, what would happen if things were different, or maybe, asking like the magic wand question where it's like, if this was exactly how you wanted it to be, like, what would it look like?
The miracle question.
The miracle question. And then I think that you can explore some of those questions with a client and then say, okay, well, what's realistic? What can we adjust? And I think sometimes setting boundaries or adjusting plans maybe doesn't necessarily look like, well, I'm just not going to my family's house in the holidays. Maybe it looks like we're setting a boundary by staying at a hotel.
Yeah.
Right.
Or we're setting a boundary by saying like, I can't remember who gave me this advice, but years ago, someone told me that like, if you struggle around like connecting with your partner or feeling like you're out of control, or I don't know, if you struggle with the holidays and seeing family, then like having the goal of, okay, every day my partner and I are going to like go do something by ourselves, or whether it be just like every morning we go for a walk, or every, in the afternoon we go get coffee or something, or just try to try to think about a way that you can connect with your less stressful people, and so that it gives you a little bit of a break from kind of the chaos of the holidays. Those are some of like the main kind of tools that I will hear people talk about around trying to, find some solace or some peace within the holidays.
And I'm just going to put this out there, but also consider directly addressing and resolving all the unresolved crap that everybody in your family is still carrying with them.
At the dinner table.
At the dinner table.
Okay, but what does that actually look like, Lucas? And how realistic is that?
Well,
or are you saying
for $10,000, I will fly out and attend your Thanksgiving dinner with your family.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, I mean,
right.
I know that you love working with adult kids and families. Like, how common is it for people to actually go to therapy with their adult siblings and to try to resolve some of this stuff?
Almost never until I talk them into it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't even say talk them into it, because really I don't have to convince them. I just need to suggest it and like open that up as an option. Because almost every time they're like, I can do that. It's like, yeah. It's like, yeah, of course you can do that. Why wouldn't you be able to do that? And they don't know why they thought they wouldn't be able to do that. They just somehow assumed that they couldn't. And that speaks largely to how individualized the focus of our profession still is in a lot of ways. And managed care plays a big part in that. But I don't think I've ever had a client not do it. Yeah.
Well, and I think that like there's this like expectation that, well, my siblings wouldn't want to do that, or there would be too much conflict, or they can't change, or like I don't know.
Yeah, and it's like, and I don't know why I just thought of this, but there was one session that I had planned, which I didn't know if this one was going to happen, because it was a couple I was working with, and it was getting this guy to agree to do a session with his wife and his mom. And so like being in between your wife and your mother-in-law that aren't getting along, like that's a tall order. But when they agreed to do it, I started the session by giving him a little trophy. Like I found a little like trophy. It's like the cup. I was like, this is your trophy for agreeing to do this. I think this is remarkable.
Yeah.
What
issues
so it's like,
were they dealing with? Like what did they want to talk about?
Oh my God, every issue that any person experiences with their mother-in-law.
Yeah.
Like all of them. It's in-laws are, I guess I still joke about this, but like in-laws would keep me in business as a couples therapist, because it's tricky. And it's like in-laws, everyone's an in-law. It's not one in-law. It's not just a mother-in-law, not just a father-in-law. It doesn't matter what side they're on. Like it is incredibly complex for two families to merge into one. And I think the holidays are just the greatest illumination of it, because holidays are generally the time where the family's traditions, cultural worldviews, rituals really come to the forefront and center stage. And so it's like in-laws are going to see you as a threat to sustaining the symbolic immortality of their worldview. And so it's like holidays are just a time where all of that is heightened.
So what sort of tips or like what sort of communication strategies do you typically work with clients on in managing in-laws?
Like you communicate, and it's like if it's the, say it's a wife who's having a problem with her mother-in-law, it's like you have to figure out what the husband's role is in that with his mom, because first you need to address like his tension.
Yeah.
Because he's stuck between the two most important women in his life, his mom and his wife. And so it's like helping him figure out, and I don't think there's one answer to it, but I would say that ultimately what that person needs to figure out is how to prioritize their wife over their mom.
Yeah.
And that's difficult. That can be a really difficult thing to do, but the most effective way to do it, and I would say the way that gets problematic and doesn't go well is when they try to do that passively, as opposed to just like sitting down with their mom and saying like, this is my wife. This is our family. like they are going to be my priority.
Yeah.
And I can see that that's difficult for you and you're having a hard time with that. But it's like, this is what you raised me to do.
Yep.
It's like, this is me growing up. This is me becoming my own man. And, you know, I would imagine that you would have the same expectation of dad
Right.
to align with you over his mom.
Yep.
You know, and so it's like, remind them that they're just not the in-law, but they also have in-laws.
Yep.
Yeah.
And dealt with a lot of this.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Making sure to be mindful of where you came from, right?
Yeah.
You also had to navigate through having in-laws or navigate through the relationships, you know, and how did that look for you?
And so like going back to that one session where this guy came in with his wife and his mother-in-law, very early on into that session, I think it was like after I did some joining with the mother-in-law, because I hadn't met her before, but she knew all about me. I asked her to tell me about her mother-in-law. And so like the second I asked that question, like, tell me about your mother-in-law, like it had an immediate effect of transforming her entire sense of what she was doing there. Because now it wasn't just her being the bad mother-in-law, you know, that's in trouble and got called to the therapist's office. It's like she remembered, it created a pathway for her to empathize with her daughter-in-law because she realized that she's another woman who dealt with similar dynamics herself.
Yeah.
And once I introduced that very quickly into the scenario, it also shifted because now she was thinking about not wanting to be the type of mother-in-law that she had, which was super helpful.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like we just need to talk about this stuff. People are so incredibly terrified of addressing problems that still exist in their family of origin as they're adults because they think it's gonna disrupt the already dysfunctional dynamic they're existing in. You know, it's like, is it gonna make things worse? Because it doesn't sound like things are well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think as a therapist and as a person with a mother-in-law, I think one of the, another just like small tip that I have heard that I've then passed on to clients too is like, if you are any communication that you are having with your partner's family needs to include your partner. And oftentimes it should actually come from your partner.
Yeah.
Most of the time. Like if I'm, you know, if I have beef with Colin's family, then like my job is not necessarily to be the person that is working through that conflict and dealing with it completely by myself. It should be probably coming from him talking, you know, like
that's what gets him out of the middle is him taking responsibility for it. Because if it's you talking over him or through him, that keeps that person concretized in the middle.
Yeah.
You know, and then they're just looking on both ends like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it ultimately does have to come from the immediate family.
It also gives them their own thought, right?
Yeah.
Because if I'm feeding you thoughts about how I feel about them, and then you're relaying that information, first of all, you're not relaying it in the way that I'm saying it because you're trying to keep that relationship intact for you, right? And you're trying to keep peace amongst everybody.
That's a good point.
So you're not relaying my stressful feelings the way that they need to be relayed, right? But if we're all together having this conversation and you're saying she's got some things that she's not really comfortable with about this relationship, right? And we're having these two conversations, then it's more likely that I'm going to be able to relay the things that I'm needing to relay, but you're also going to be able to be present in that conversation as opposed to me telling you and then you running off and telling.
And not just present, but joining. Like I think it is kind of like we need to be on the same team about this. And if I'm the one that's relaying all of this, or if I'm just telling you, hey, go deal with your mom, like that's not maybe necessarily joining
as effective.
Go deal with your mother.
It's definitely not effective.
But yeah, I mean, I think that this is part of why the holidays are so stressful for people going into it too, is they're anticipating some of this too. And so how can somebody be taking care of themselves, trying to incorporate some sense of routine in the holidays and through all this stress too?
And like, I think, a couple of things that I would put on the audience, whoever listens to this, is take a moment to reflect upon what role you might play in bringing about stress into your system when it comes to the holidays. And like one of the things that my kids are still young, but they're conscious, their brains function, it's like they can have abstract thoughts and insight. And so like I'll regularly, not too often, at least quarterly, like I'll check in on like, how am I doing as a dad? It's like, give me some feedback. Like, are there things that are frustrating, things you don't like, things I can be doing better? Like, let me know. And when it comes to, adult family systems, just let communication be simple. Like communication can be simple if we just let it be simple.
Yeah.
And so like if you're an in-law, check in with your daughter-in-law, son-in-law, whoever it is that has married into your family. It's like ask them how they experience you as an in-law. It's like, am I one of those nightmare in-laws? Do you like me? Are there things you can't stand about me?
I cannot imagine my in-laws saying that.
But what if they did?
But also, here's the thing. I mean, I do love my in-laws, but if they were to say something like that and I actually did have beef, I don't think I would feel honest. Like, I don't think I could be honest with that.
Why?
I don't know. Like,
You're a social worker.
No.
Because there's an expectation.
Truthfully, like, I don't know if I could come up with something that was like, we need to deal with this.
Could you imagine them ever doing that though?
Doing what?
Asking you that?
Maybe my mother-in-law.
I think if they presented it to you in a very sincere but also benign manner, it's like you'd be more comfortable to respond. But also I think if you're an in-law that does that, there's a good chance that you're probably not a nightmare in-law anyway.
That's true.
And like when it comes to in-laws, there's always going to be a threshold of what we're just going to have to tolerate. There's no such thing as the picture perfect dream come true in-law. There's a best case scenario, which we can strive for, but there will always, it's like when the Gottmans talk about the perpetual irreconcilable differences within a marriage, those apply to your relationships with your in-laws. There's just going to be more of them.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good point. And things that you just kind of have to deal with and things that you just have to be like, this is how it goes.
Yeah. And if you're really struggling with your in-laws, at the end of the day, it's like if you love your partner, it's like give them some credit for that.
Yeah.
It's like, thanks for bringing this person I love into the world.
Yeah.
And raising them to the point where I get to love them and be with them. Yeah. And I think every parent on the planet would deserve some degree of respect and appreciation for that.
Yeah. We speak in a lot about in-laws, like mother-in-laws and father-in-laws.
Well, father-in-laws can be problematic. They're just usually more quiet.
I think it's also important to talk about like sisters and brother-in-laws because
competition. That's a whole nother sector of this conversation is the sibling competitions that are more fully illuminated and the holidays.
Like wanting to say more.
Like my brother Phil be like, hey, you want to do Christmas at my lake house this year? And I'm like, oh yeah, Phil, you and your lake house. I'd love to.
Yeah.
Right. Certainly.
But it's like financially, my brother like obliterates me in his success, but it's like, I'm okay with that. Like I don't have resentment toward him because we just went on two different paths.
But that would be really hard for some people.
That could be hard for some people, and like those are the things we get caught up in, it's like especially when you do shared presence, like with all the kids, it's like, and like just based upon the variance in gifts that all the cousins open, it's really just like essentially your tax return, and like just demonstrating the difference in what tax bracket you're in made evident by the kid who got a fidget, and the kid who got the new Apple Watch.
This is actually, I'm glad you brought this up because this is actually something that I remember talking a lot about with one of my clients last year where she's a teacher and her, she has a sibling who makes a ton of money and they do a gift exchange every year and it's really stressful for her. And like one of the things that I remember kind of landing on with her was trying to be more thoughtful around like love languages when it comes to gifts and not just the monetary value because that's what's going to actually end up being what matters. And I think that a lot of people forget, or they think love languages is cheesy. And I get it. It's kind of overdone, over talked about, but it's also something that's so important. And like, sure, her brother could just, get, he could just like give iPads to everybody, and wow, that's really cool and that's exciting. But like, when you actually take some time and think about, what matters to the person who I drew, or what matters to the people in my life, like, and tailor the gift based on that thoughtfulness or what you think their love language is, it actually, like, there's so much more meaning there. And I think that people, this is not new information. I'm not giving you new information, but this is I think it's a good reminder of like, when things like that come up, there are ways that we can demonstrate thoughtfulness and honestly win. So
that's a really, I'm really glad you
me.
said that, because now I just need to tell my brother Phil that I want an iPad for Christmas.
Right.
2.
Yeah, 2. 2 of them.
Ask for a lake house.
I want the
next
same
time.
one my nephew Jake gets.
Yeah, there you go. Your love language is not gifts.
No, mine is acts of service, which is horrible. It's like the most it's like,
ask Phil to make you breakfast.
It's like, do my laundry, and if you don't, I guess I'm not loved.
You know what? That's my husband's love language too, and it's hard.
So this is a product of patriarchy. So it's like, my partner's like, she knows that's my love language, but also it's like, I'm not going to hold you to this. I've diversified my love languages. Become multilingual in your love languages. So especially if your primary is acts of service, because that is awful.
Yeah.
But I think as therapists, like, these are ways that you can offer some relief to your clients of like, if these are the things that are causing them stress coming up into the holidays, like, try to, like, these are some alternatives or things that you can try to challenge them on or expand their thinking a little bit.
And at the end of the day, be like the Cranks and just go on a cruise.
Exactly.
I love that. That's always an option.
Oh, man. But the end of the movie, like, they don't go on a cruise.
Ugh.
And then their daughter comes
Their daughter ends up coming home for the holidays. And so then they have to figure it out. They have to suddenly on Christmas Eve, of course, get a Christmas tree and get a honey smoked ham or whatever it's called. And
Boston Market.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Do those exist still?
I don't know what that is.
All right.
I don't think so. Maybe 1 or 2.
There's like a fast food franchise of like Thanksgiving foods.
Oh.
Yeah, it was
I never actually went to one, but there was one by
I've
my
been.
house.
Well,
It's quite interesting.
any other last tips or thoughts that you have for people navigating the family around the holidays, setting boundaries, or trying to ease up on the expectations?
Find joy in the absurdity. It's like, expect chaos. It's like, you're probably going to have to spend time with people that are hard for you to stomach or tolerate, but it's like, flirt with them a little bit. It's like, find something to like with them. Poke at the things that drive you the most crazy about them. And again, that really just like bring out the absurdity and relish in the absurdity of it all. It's temporary. It's like, it's over before we know it. And it's like, you don't need to fix all your family's problems, in Q4 of this year. But, it's like, pay attention to what's difficult and uncomfortable during the holidays this year and keep them in mind for your New Year's resolution. Those are the things you're going to address.
There you go.
Yeah, I would say be comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Make sure that you're present and limit your time. Limit your time and your interaction with them.
Yeah. And know what your threshold is.
Right.
If it's 4 hours, take a break every 4 hours. If it's 2 hours, see a family therapist. But but just be mindful of those things. One of my first professors I ever had in this field, he said that never spend more than 48 hours with your extended family and in-laws. Like, never. And anything over 24 hours is risky. So keep that in mind. Happy holidays, everyone.
Yeah.
Yes.
Happy holidays.